events, but from the comfort of your own home. Tonight, we are so excited to have Dan Brown with us to celebrate his picture book debut for Wild Symphony, which came out today, so congrats. Dan is joined in conversation by Petra Mayer, an editor at NPR Books. Your ticket tonight includes a copy of Wild Symphony with a signed book plate from Dan. After the event tonight, we'll be shipping out the books and placing them for store pickup. Wild Symphony also makes a great present. So perhaps in light of school year starting, or it's never too early to start holiday shopping, we're gonna go ahead and drop the link in the chat box if you'd like to order additional copies. The orders will still include signed book plates from Dan while supplies last. So tonight you can ask the author questions by clicking Q&A located at the bottom of your screen. You can also vote on your favorite questions. And at the end, we'll have time to go over some together. As always, please remember this is a creative safe space and we ask that folks be respectful of one another in any questions and comments. So on to tonight's event. It is my pleasure to introduce internationally best-selling author Dan Brown, joined in conversation by Petra Mayer. Dan Brown has always been a storyteller. So before he became a writer, he played classical piano and told stories through music. Dan has written many #1 bestsellers, including the DaVinci Code. In 2005, he was named one of the 100 most influential people in the world by Time magazine. He is a graduate of Amherst College and Phillips Exeter Academy, where he later returned to teach English before focusing full-time on writing. Wild Symphony is his picture book debut. It received a starred review from a school library journal. In it, we find Maestro Mouse introducing readers to different animal friends through 20 short poems. Accompanied by beautiful and whimsical illustrations, this symphony of a story is filled with humor, nuggets of wisdom, and coded messages to solve in true Dan Brown fashion. The book becomes a multi-sensory experience when you download a free app that plays corresponding music for each animal. Petra Mayer is an editor and resident nerd at NPR Books. She brings to the job passion, speed reading skills, and a truly impressive collection of Doctor Who doodads. You can also hear her on the air and on the occasional episode of Pop Culture Happy Hour. She also attended Amherst College and received her master's in journalism from Columbia University. So with that, I'm excited to turn the conversation over to Dan and Petra, so enjoy.
I'm so excited to be here. I promise I won't sing the Lord Jeff, even though we're having a musical evening.
That'd be a blast from the past.
So we've heard about Maestro Mouse. I got to read this book beforehand, which is the funnest part of my job, is prepping for events like this where I get to read wonderful books. And when I think about an orchestra conductor, I don't think about a mouse. So how did you pick the animals for this book?
The mouse was the funniest animal to choose. I mean, first of all, you know, you're right. A maestro needs to be a large character, somebody who can stand up in front of an orchestra and be seen. And for some reason, the thought of a tiny little mouse standing behind a little itsy bitsy podium, you know, was amusing, especially if the first violinist is a hippopotamus or something. It just seemed like a funny juxtaposition.
Can they all see him? Like, are the animals in the back?
You know what? It's a children's book. They can all somehow see him. I'm not sure how, but they can.
My inner like 2-year-old, because you know they ask things like that.
They're on risers.
Excellent. So one thing I was also wondering is what was the process when you're composing the music? Did the animal come first, or did you just think of a tune and say, oh, that sounds like a frog to me? Yeah,
it kind of depended on the song. With the first song I wrote was Happy Frogs, and it was just because I heard a bunch of frogs in a bog chirping, and there was a big bullfrog that sounded very low and some high peepers and some frogs in the middle, and I thought it sounded like music. I went home and I wrote a little fugue called Happy Frogs, and realized nobody's going to know this is frogs, so I wrote a little poem to go with it. I don't know why, I just thought it was fun, and it had a nice little moral that we're all different sizes and shapes and colors, and we all sound different, we speak different languages, but if we work together, we can make beautiful music. And I had fun doing that, and then did another, and it just sort of grew from there.
How did you pick the other animals? What called out to you and said, this animal needs to be in an orchestra?
Well, okay, so yeah, that's a great question. It really depended on the moral I wanted to tell. These songs and poems were really inspired by different things. For example, The Ostrich, I wanted to be able to tell kids through a moral that, hey, look, you know what, if you feel really stressed out, it's okay to sort of close down and spend some alone time. But don't forget, when you're done with that, to come back out into the sunlight and reconnect with your family and friends. And the ostrich was the perfect animal to do that because he sticks his head in the ground. And it was just sort of, that was logical. Something like the whale, I just knew I had an idea for a song that sounded like a whale. And so I thought, well, what can a whale teach us? And so I decided the music first on that one.
It's interesting, the book is coming out now when, I think a lot of kids could use helpful maxims about how to negotiate the world. But I'm sure this was in progress long before current events. So what made you decide now is the time to write a children's book?
It's funny. This is something I've wanted to do for many, many years. My parents did not believe in television. I grew up with no TV. So as kids, I read Dr. Seuss, Richard Scarry, Maurice Sendak. I was addicted to Dr. Seuss, loved the poetry. And while I read, I would listen to my parents' record collection, which was exclusively classical music. So I was listening to Tchaikovsky and Bartok and Bach and, just a bunch of crazy stuff for a young kid to be listening to, and just had such wonderful memories of that experience that I wanted to create for children today that same experience that I had, but to give it an added twist, which was that the classical music they'd be hearing was related directly to the book, kind of like a Peter and the Wolf with an illustrated element. And to do that, we used technology and created this incredible app. I mean, the kids have used it. Everybody sort of thinks it's just magic. It's augmented reality. You just hold a phone over the book. On whatever page you happen to be on, it will trigger exactly the right piece of classical music. And it's really fun.
Well, you actually answered the next question I was going to ask. And I also feel like we had the same childhood. I also was a no TV kid who read everything I could get my hands on. Did not listen to Bartok, though. Bartok is a cruel thing to do to a small child.
I had to play Bartok.
Oh, me too. Piano lessons when I was 9.
Yeah, there you have it.
I called him Barftok, which amused me.
You know what? Some of that stuff is appropriately named.
But I was going to ask about sort of what music has meant to you throughout your life. My original question was, what was your first experience that you can remember of music being meaningful to you? But
yeah, my mom was a professional pianist and a church organist. And some of my earliest memories were learning how to read music by sitting with her on the organ bench in church with a full congregation, and she's playing, and I would follow the notes and turn the page just the right. And of course, I'm terrified that I'm going to turn it too early or too late, and I'm just going to make a big mess. So that's kind of how I learned to read music, or at least rhythms. Music as a kid, it was a friend to me when I was sad. It was a friend to me when I was excited and helped me celebrate. And I found that it inspired my imagination. Peter and the Wolf, Carnival of the Animals, Fantasia, The Sorcerer's Apprentice, all those sorts of pieces that had a narrative, or at least were a character. In the case of Carnival of the Animals, really inspired my imagination, and I just wanted to do the same thing for kids today.
Now, I probably shouldn't ask this because we're not supposed to have favorites, but do you have a favorite animal?
I think my favorite piece is the ray. Very different from the other pieces, very, very gentle and quiet, and the kids who've heard it sort of put their arms out and float around like a ray underwater. It's very, very peaceful. And we use some really interesting instrumental techniques to create the ambiance in that. And there were people using a violin bow on the side of a cymbal, on the side of glockenspiels and xylophones, which created this really interesting and rich underwater sound. So that to me is my favorite song. I don't know why my favorite poem is Busy Beetles.
Oh, that was my favorite too. It reminded me of
Okay, great. I mean, maybe it's because I rhyme Beatles with Feetles.
Yeah, I think so.
Know. But I was sort of worried that this book is coming out in 30-something languages. And I thought, well, how do you translate busy beetles digging with your little feetles? I don't know how you translate that. But
yeah, I know.
They did. I just received the German edition, and it's in there. I can't read German well enough to know how the rhyme is.
All right, now I have to find the German edition and see if I can read it. Well, so I actually did want to ask about sort of what was the process, how you constructed the songs, not just for the Ray, but for all of them.
Yeah, piano is the only instrument I play. I played a little guitar as a kid, but now I just really play piano. And so, I mean, I don't play all the instruments in an orchestra. So what I do is I create the song on the piano. Whatever I would go, if I'm writing Busy Beatles, I'd create the rhythms and the melodies and the harmonies on the piano. And then I would play whatever I've created into a computer to create what's called a MIDI file, or just a digitized file of the actual note strikes. And then I can take the melody and say, like, I wonder what that sounds like played by a violin. And I can sign that to a violin and say, well, you know what, I'm gonna add some chords here and cellos to sort of make it rich. And I think that we need some timpani here. And so I start to orchestrate the piece digitally. And it's amazing what we can do now with computers, just as a work tool, to be able to hear more or less what the song will sound like when it's finally played by an orchestra. So when I'm done with that process and I've orchestrated, then I took it to an orchestrator named Carla, an incredibly talented guy from Houston, very, very good orchestral mind. And he would help me. He'd basically make it right. He'd say, you know what, the French horns can't play that high. Maybe rather than in cellos, you want this in this instrument. And he would help fine tune the arrangement. And in some cases, he would add a section, even say, let's repeat this. So he was really really crucial in the process too. When we were done with that, we had a score, which is just the parts, the musical parts that the orchestra plays. I flew to Zagreb, Croatia, with a friend, my producer, Bob Lord from Parma Recordings. And we rehearsed with the orchestra, and it was great to see them. They had a blast playing this music. The music is classical, but it is also supposed to be fun. And I think one of the first songs we did was Bouncing Kangaroos, which has a timpani on every single quarter note, I think. and it's detuned, so it sort of goes boing, boing. The timpanist is using the pedal to try to get it to create that boing sound. And this poor guy, I don't know how many takes we did, but the poor timpanist, I think his calf muscles from having to use the foot pedal over and over, I think he limped home that night, is my suspicion. But we all had a good time.
And it's so fun to listen to too. But I also wanted to ask, I mean, your other collaborator, the other component in this is the marvelous illustrations, which are just so fun. I loved watching, animals from previous pages turn up throughout the book. Oh, there's the bird with the flute. So can you tell me about your illustrator and how you found her?
Yeah, Susan Bathory is from Budapest, Hungary. And when I started to work with the Children's Division at Random House, we said, well, we clearly need an illustrator. I didn't know any illustrators, and they obviously had the expertise in that. And so they took me into their boardroom, which had the biggest table I've ever seen. And I don't know, my memory is that there were about 100 different stacks of drawings from different artists with no names. And they basically said, start whittling it down. And I got it down to 4 artists that I liked. And they sort of laughed and said, well, you've chosen 3 pretty well-known artists and 1 woman who's fairly unknown. I said, well, I hope the woman who's unknown isn't the one with the crocodiles with the crazy eyes, because that's my first choice. And they said, well, that's her. That's Susan Bathory. And we took a look at more of her work, and as a team decided she was perfect, and she just hit a home run. And these drawings are, all I know is if I were a kid, if I had this book as a child, it would have been my favorite book, just based on the drawings alone. I think she's an incredible talent, and I'm so happy to have been able to work with her. And she came to Zagreb to the recording sessions, and we sat in the audience together, and she'd be listening to Maestro Mouse sort of sketching and saying, what do you think? And I, pretending that I had some sort of artistic ability, would say, well, maybe the ears should be a little bigger, but she didn't need any help. She knew exactly what she was doing.
One of the things that I love about the book, So this is embarrassing. I didn't twig until the very last page that there were puzzles all over. And then I went back and I looked more closely at the illustrations and I saw the little letters that were hidden here and there. And what I wanted to ask was, people often compare music and math, but are there similarities between writing music and constructing puzzles?
Absolutely. Well, first of all, there's an enormous correlation between writing adult fiction and writing music. You cannot write a good piece of music or a good thriller if you don't understand structure. You could have all the best plot elements or all the best melodies, but if you don't put them in the right order, in the right sequence, and give them the right weight, it doesn't work. You also need to understand dynamics. You can't have 5 fortissimo sections or 5 chase scenes in a row. You need interstitial material to separate it, to give the reader, the listener, a chance to catch his or her breath. Good musical lines ask questions and give answers. And actually, I believe a good paragraph has the same sort of arc to it. So there really is a tie there. As far as codes, music is a symbolic language. It's pretty amazing that we've created this symbolic language that you can just sort of put dots on a staff and people know what to do. And I believe that music is a code of sorts. A very universal code that when it's deciphered, we all get the same answer, which is great. It doesn't matter whether you speak German or Turkish or English. You will hear Busy Beatles the same way the other person does.
That's a lovely way of looking at it as sort of a universal code. We're getting towards the end of our conversation and going to open it up pretty soon for audience questions, but I have one more thing to ask you, which is, this is a very complex book. I mean, it works on so many levels, just the rhyme itself, and then the illustrations and the music and the puzzles. So once a kid has read this, what do you want the reader to take away from it?
Well, I mean, many things. Ideally, an appreciation and enthusiasm for music. That would be my first choice. Clearly, the illustrations should spark some imagination and some happiness. The poems all have morals. And, we live in a very fragmented society now. And, you and I may have grown up very much in a similar environment that was highly creative and no technology. That's not the way kids grow up today. Between social media and just the chaos of the digital world, I really wanted to include some very simple, almost self-evident morals with each one of these poems. And so ideally there'll be a moral element to what you take away from this book, ideally.
So I wanted to ask if you'd be willing to read one of the poems from the book, maybe the one about Maestro Mouse?
I will read the first poem. I'm going to need glasses probably, and it's dark in here. I may even need a light, so bear with me here. Let's see.
Sure.
Okay. Maestro Mouse. I'm Maestro Mouse, I'll be your guide. So come along on my wild ride. You'll meet my friends, they're smart and fun. I think you'll love them, every one. They live in jungles, ponds, and trees, out in fields and under seas. Each one teaches something new, a secret lesson just for you. My friends and I, we have a plan. Try to guess it if you can. Listen well and use your eyes. I think you'll love our big surprise. I'll hide some clues along the way, a hidden game. Come on, let's play.
And I think if people want to actually hear the music that goes with that, I've been told we have a video from the Houston Youth Symphony. love that. So we've got some audience questions coming in from Katie G. She says, "Hi Dan, what's important to you when creating a code or leaving clues? How did you adapt your calling card of coded messages for a picture book?"
Wow. Well, I mean, the most important thing when you're leaving a code is what they call the clear text. When you finally decipher the code, it's got to be something worthwhile. You don't want somebody to spend a lot of time cracking a code to find out that the answer is not very interesting. So the clear text is always the most important thing. And as far as how I adapted to a children's book, I just, anagrams, this idea of words out of order, is by far the simplest kind of code, and kids understand them immediately. It's just a word jumble. And on every page in Wild Symphony, there are, in the illustrations, there are letters that are carefully hidden in the landscape. And these kids who've looked at the book say, "Hey, wait, what's the letter A doing hidden in the grass? And there's a W up in the clouds. What should I do with those?" And I said, "What do you think you do with them?" "Well, I guess we find them all and see if we can spell a word." And it turns out that you can spell words that relate to the orchestra. And so that's a fun game that the kids have been playing. And there are some other codes for adults in there. Not that it's adult content, but it's they're much harder to find. There's a musical code in there. There's even there's a codfish hidden in there that has a message in it. There's a lot of things that you may or may not see. You're gonna go look.
It took me a while. I mean, I saw those little letters and it took me a while to figure that out. Maybe I'm not as smart as the average small child. Let's see. Mary McKean says, "Hello from Detroit. This is fantastic. What were some of your favorite books as a child, apart from Dr. Seuss?"
Wow. Well, I loved Where the Wild Things Are. Chicken Soup with Rice. What Do People Do All Day by Richard Scarry. And later I loved A Wrinkle in Time. A Wrinkle in Time is a book that just sort of changed my life somehow. I was a little bit older when I read it, but this idea of, wait, you can mix physics and time travel and a love story and for this little thriller. I don't know. I think a few lights went off when I read that book.
We also, I think, must have had the same bookshelf as a child because I had all of
Okay, you knew all those? All right.
Chicken Soup with Rice is the bomb.
Yeah, and there was something about Oobleck, which I don't know if you remember
Oh,
that.
that's a Dr. Seuss one.
Yeah, the green stuff that fell from the sky.
Yeah.
Oobleck. Yeah.
That I didn't have. My mother wouldn't let me have Dr. Seuss
Okay.
books. I had to get them from grandparents. But we have another question. Rachel Peters says, "This feels very much like a modern Carnival of the Animals." Did you take inspiration from that piece? And I would add, what were your other influences here too?
Well, Peter and the Wolf was sort of the first time I realized that a melody or an instrument could be a character. Carnival of the Animals, less so, because it was much more ambiental. So a piece like Aquarium, for example, creates this feeling that you're underwater. And both of those played a big role, I would say. And, this is going to sound kind of funny, and I don't know if anybody knows this record, but one of the records my parents had that wasn't strictly classical was called Herb Alpert and the Tijuana Brass. And they had an album called Whipped Cream, and the music was kind of funny. It was kind of like Bouncing Kangaroos or Happy Hippos. It had a lot of brass, and I realized, like, oh, music can be funny, actually. And I think I drew on that a little bit in writing these pieces.
I'm going to combine two questions next because they kind of go together. Do you see yourself writing more children's books, and will they be set in the universe of the Wild Symphony?
You know what? I've learned never to say never. I'm working on a new Robert Langdon thriller at the moment. But you know what? I do have more ideas. I could do Wild Salad about vegetables, or something. I don't know. Anything's possible. I would work with Susan Battery again in 2 seconds, and I work with Random House Kids again in 2 seconds. So we'll see what happens.
We actually did have a question about when the new Robert Langdon book could be expected. So you answered that.
The goal is to publish at the end of next year. It's been a busy year and a strange year for all of us. I'm hoping I make that deadline, but that's what we're looking for.
Here's a question from Alex Cannon. Do you have any advice for children who want to study music?
Sure. You have to, the most important thing if you're going to study music is to be self-motivated. You cannot learn music if you're being forced to learn it and you think, oh my God, I've got to practice piano for 20 minutes a day. I can't possibly do that. If you want to learn music, you have to feel that you can't wait to play piano. And when mom or dad says it's time to go to bed, you're like, no, I'm not done. I want to keep playing. And some people have that and some people don't. Now, I should say, I didn't have that when I started piano. I hated piano lessons. My mom was my piano teacher and she was fantastic, but it's not easy to take lessons from a parent. And so they quickly got me another piano teacher that I really didn't like. But I stuck with it because I was told I had to. And at some point I got proficient enough and started to understand music enough that I had that experience that we've all had, which is that strange pleasure we get from hearing sound waves arranged in a certain way. Nobody really understands why music works, why you hear Ode to Joy or Carmina Burana and just feel the energy welling up inside you, or why you hear, a Poulenc motet or something and want to cry. Nobody knows. It affects our brain. The sound waves affect our brains in ways that we don't understand. But, the only other advice I would give to anybody who wants to study music as a young child is go easy on yourself. Practice is the only way you're going to get better. And there's going to be a little bit of time when what you're playing doesn't sound very good. And it's kind of frustrating and doesn't feel very good. If you can somehow be patient through that process, you'll get to a point where suddenly you love it.
And that's one of the messages in the book.
It is, actually.
I looked at it and thought, oh God, I wish I had stuck with it as a kid. I never got to that point where it sounds good. We do have another question about the music. Can you tell us more about the musicians?
Yeah, well, the musicians that played this piece were the Zagreb Festival Orchestra from Croatia. Unbelievably talented group of people. And the thing I love most about this orchestra is they understood that this was supposed to be fun. And when I'm in the audience or in the control room looking out at an orchestra and I see people laughing as they're playing, something's right. It comes through in the music. There are plenty of orchestras that can play technically perfectly, but for some reason, the Zagreb Festival Orchestra just got it. And if you listen to, even Clumsy Kittens, you'll understand that they were having fun.
And here is another question from Mary McKean. How old were you when you wrote your first book? Did you always want to be a writer?
I was 5 years old when I wrote my first book. It's actually in a secret closet right behind me, a mobile bookshelf. It was called The Giraffe, the Pig, and the Pants on Fire. That is the actual title. It was a thriller, obviously. I've read it. It doesn't make a lot of sense. There's a giraffe, a pig, and a pair of pants that are on fire, and they're all friends, and they go through the forest and have a little adventure. I always loved writing poetry as a kid. My dad was a very good poet, still is a very good poet. And of course, I love Dr. Seuss. And I wrote a lot of songs also that had lyrics, and that's another form of poetry. So yeah, I did always want to be a writer. It's kind of funny. I studied in college at Emory. I studied music composition with Lou Spratlin. And I studied short story writing and fiction, creative writing, with Alan Lelchuk, a pretty well-known novelist. And I got out of college and thought, well, I know I want to have a creative life. Should I write music or should I write books? And I thought, well, music's going to be much more fun. So I went out to Los Angeles and had a lot of songs that I'd written, and was very fortunate to get a production deal. And I made a record with the British Record Producer of the Year. The record came out, and about 9 people bought it. 6 of them were my mother, I'm sure. And about that time, I had an idea for a novel. And I wrote a novel I called Digital Fortress. And the first editor in New York who read it bought it. at St. Martin's Press. And I thought, wow, book publishing is so easy. And that book came out and it sold about 9 copies. And I thought, okay, it's a lot harder than I thought.
Oh, we have another Robert Langdon fan. You just made my day. Can you give us a synopsis, or is that too spoilery?
Oh, I can't possibly tell you a synopsis of the new book. There's only really one thing I can tell you about this book. And if you've read my books, you know that Robert Langdon is incredibly lucky, because at the beginning of every book, he meets a beautiful physicist or cryptologist or brain surgeon or noetic scientist, a lovely woman, you know, that can be not only a love interest, but also knows everything he needs to know about a certain topic. In this book starts much differently. In this book, he's been in a relationship. He is very much in love with a woman, and they've been together for 3 years. And the woman that he's in love with is a character from one of the previous novels. I can't tell you who it is, but it's kind of a different way to open a book for Robert Langdon.
Can't wait to read it. So we have back to the wild, pardon me, I have my own wild symphony going on here.
Oh,
do you hear some yowling in the background?
I've got a dog under my feet also, so.
It's dinner time, so we're gonna hear some yowling.
Okay.
So, but back to Wild Symphony. What did you enjoy the most while you were writing it?
You know, I enjoy the creative process no matter what it is. It's funny, novelists are we're solitary people, we're private people, we work alone, and we don't really collaborate. At some point I send pages to my editor, but other than that, I work alone. So this project, to work with an illustrator, 80 musicians, a producer, a conductor, a whole team of sound engineers, and then all the support staff and publicity people, you know, behind the scenes in the world of music. It was a massive collaborative project. And that's what I enjoyed most, the collaboration. I had collaborated somewhat because I've made some movies. So I collaborated with Ron Howard and Tom Hanks and those guys, but collaborate is really, that's a generous word. I was more like a tourist on the film set. They would ask me my opinion of things to make me feel better, I think. But you know, you're not going to tell Ron Howard how to make a movie. So I just enjoyed the process.
Actually, this is my own question, because I love asking writers this. When you're talking about process, what is your process? How does a writing day work for you?
For some reason, I feel I have to write absolutely first thing in the morning. I feel like there's, you know, when you're in the dream state, your mind is creating something out of nothing. And we've all had dreams where you say, like, where did that come from? That makes no sense. It was so vivid and complicated. I like to move from the dream state to my writing phase very, very quickly. So I will, you know, I'll get up around 4 o'clock in the morning, have, you know, a spinach blueberry smoothie and a bunch of matcha tea or coffee or whatever caffeine I'm consuming that morning. And I'll go straight to work. And I'll work until 10 or 11 or 12 if it's going well. And then I leave the writing behind for the day. And I usually play piano for, you know, half an hour on my way back to the real world. And then in the afternoon, I get some exercise or deal with the business of publishing.
Oh, we have another question that just came in. We're kind of bouncing around a little bit here from topic to topic.
Okay.
How did you decide to include, why did you decide to include secret codes in the Wild Symphony?
I loved codes as a kid. I was trying to create a book that kids would love. Also, I had this just phenomenal editor, Danny Valadares, who, if I remember correctly, was the one who said, like, you know, you're known for codes, like you should really do that. And this book is so rich in part because of Danny. She just had so many great ideas, and yeah, I wrote the codes, but we all sort of decided what kids would love, and so I'm very happy we added them. The children who've seen the book, I don't know whether their eyes are just really good or what, but they see these letters instantly. And I remember when they sent me the proofs, I was like, you're missing the W for the, you know, whatever. And they said, no, it's there. I'm sure it's got to be there. We've had it proved. And I look and I look and I look, and I've got a magnifying glass and glasses. And And I'm sure it's not there. And of course, you know, some little kid says, no, it's right there. It's like, you're right. There it is. I knew that. So.
Yeah, little kids will spot anything.
Yeah.
I feel even more embarrassed now that it took me a long time to find those letters in the back. We have a question from Alberto Paguada. What is your favorite fiction and nonfiction book?
Wow, favorite fiction and nonfiction. Well, I've already mentioned A Wrinkle in Time. You know, I read so much different. I read almost exclusively nonfiction. So my favorite novels in the thriller genre would probably be The Bourne Identity. I thought was just absolutely brilliant. I would say that for me is probably the pinnacle of thriller writing. Nonfiction, I just finished a book called Life 3.0 by Max Tegmark, which is about artificial intelligence, which I absolutely love. I read a lot of history, a lot of philosophy, lately a lot of psychology, and a lot of quantum physics, and a lot of stuff that I really struggle to understand. But most of the information for these novels comes from personal interviews with specialists. But I can't really talk to a physicist knowing nothing. You don't want to waste his or her time, and you also don't want to look like a fool. So I try to learn as much as I can from books before I go and make a fool of myself in person.
That was going to be actually my question was, how does all this writing inform your work?
Enormously. I mean, I write about very complicated topics that, I wrote a book about glaciology in the Arctic Circle and NASA and extraterrestrial life. And these are all things I had to study. So one of the reasons these books take so long is I'm not writing about something I know in many cases. John Gresham's a writer that I admire, and he writes about something he knows, and he's able to write books a little bit faster because he's a lawyer and he understands that world. So if I'm going to write about glaciology, or if I'm going to write about artificial intelligence, or a pandemic like an Inferno, where I've got to know biochemistry and virology, I actually have to learn a lot over the course of a year or sometimes two before I can start writing.
Okay, well, this is where I have to do my job because I recommend books for a living. Have you read a book called Midnight at Chernobyl?
I have not. I've
heard
dude,
it. It's so good. I read it and suddenly I understood the Soviet command economy and a little bit of nuclear physics.
Wow.
It's an amazing book for taking these vast topics and making them accessible to the general reader. So
I will add it to my list. Thank you.
I have to compulsively recommend books.
Okay. That's right.
We have a question. This is a good one. Has the pandemic affected your writing in any way?
I think novelists are the lucky ones when it comes to COVID, because we are very used to living alone, working alone. We work at our homes, in the dark, all alone. So everybody else in the world is feeling what it feels like to be a novelist now. It can be a little lonely, a little bit isolating. The only way, other than being concerned for the state of the world, the only way it's practically affected me is that I travel a lot for research, and I haven't been traveling. So that really is the only way it's impacted me. I did have Corona. I actually contracted the virus and had it, and was fortunately fine. But that was right at the beginning, before we really even knew what it was. I had a rough 3 days, and then it was gone. So, but now I consider myself immune. I don't know if that's medically accurate, but I feel like it's impossible I could ever get it again.
Actually, the next question just anticipated what I was going to say. Is, can you see incorporating COVID into your writing? I should say we have about 3 minutes left, but would you ever consider writing a pandemic thriller?
No, I already did. I wrote Inferno about a pandemic. No, I think we're all sick of COVID. I try to write escapist books that transport you somewhere you haven't been. So COVID's where we've all been. There's no need to write about it.
Fair enough. So in the few minutes that we have left, does anybody out there have another question? Because I've got tons, but this is for you guys to ask questions. Well, then I will ask one, which is that this is one that I like to ask all writers. Do you have a piece of advice for people who are just starting out, who have a book in their head and don't know how to get it out? What do you tell people like that?
You know, it's funny. I did a master class on writing, and that was sort of one of the primary questions we got from students. You know, how do I start? I personally believe very, very strongly in outlining, because it's a very safe process. You're not judging your language. You're just saying, like, I got to get this character from here to here. I just trust I'll know how to do it eventually. And I also recommend people write the last chapter first, such that you know where you're headed. Even if it changes when you get there, at least you've sort of set a fire and there's a beacon in the distance and you know that's where you're headed. You might get there and say, I've got to move the fire 10 feet to the left and make it blue. But, you know, you at least you had a direction. I also encourage people to not necessarily write what they know, but to write what they want to know. Meaning that, you know, you may love ballet, but know nothing about it. And you want to write a thriller that takes place in a ballet company, or you want to write a romance that takes place in a ballet company. It's a great opportunity to do a deep dive into the world of ballet and learn about it. And what happens when you do that is if you're writing about something you're excited about, that enthusiasm translates into the writing and your readers feel it. So I hope that's helpful.
I hope it is helpful to all the budding writers out there. Thank you so much, Dan Brown. This was amazing. So fun to talk to you.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you both for joining us tonight. That was wonderful to hear. And thank you, viewers, for those questions. Let's see, Dan, I did have one. I know you talked about liking the Ray's music, and then for poetry, enjoying the Beatles, which I also did enjoy. Do you relate most to any of these animal groups, or like many of those nuggets of wisdom stand out more than others? Or
you know, maybe the reason I like Busy Beatles is because the message is, look, it's great to be busy, but you also need to play sometimes. You know, work hard, play hard. I've got the work hard part down. It's the play hard part that I still struggle with. I think we all do. We're all sort of overachieving society. So Busy Beatles resonates for me a little bit.
All right. Well, thanks for sharing. All right, viewers, remember you can still click the link in the chat to purchase any additional copies of Wild Symphony. They will come with signed book plates from Dan while supplies last. As an independent bookstore, please know that we're just so thankful for your support. So just want to say, be sure to check out our website for updated event listings, and you can follow our children and teen department on social media under @KidsInProse. So that about wraps up our evening. Thank you, Dan. Thank you, Petra, for joining us. Viewers, we hope to see you again soon. Keep reading. We wish you well, and good night.
Good night, everyone.
Everybody.
Thanks so much.
Bye-bye, everybody.